They laughed at the tired father the moment he stepped into the elegant charity gala. The expensive champagne glasses clinked in the background as whispers rippled through the crowd like poison. David Thompson stood frozen at the entrance, his worn-out suit hanging loosely on his frame, a painful contrast to the tailored tuxedos and designer dresses that filled the grand ballroom. The stain on his jacket sleeve, probably spilled orange juice from rushing his daughter to school that morning, now felt like a scarlet letter under the harsh chandelier lights. "Isn't that the window cleaner?" someone whispered too loudly, causing several heads to turn. "What is he doing at Judge Harrison's charity event?" Another voice, female and dripping with condescension. "I heard he's trying to adopt another child, as if he can barely manage the one he has." David clutched the invitation in his pocket, knuckles white, as he scanned the room for a friendly face. His daughter's future hung on making connections tonight, on being seen as worthy. But all he found were smirks and averted gazes, the crowd physically parting as if poverty might be contagious. Would you have approached him with a kind word, or joined those turning away? Tell us in the comments. He straightened his back and took one step forward, then another. The leather of his only dress shoes, polished frantically that evening, squeaked against the marble floor, drawing even more unwanted attention. But David Thompson wasn't leaving. Not tonight, not when everything that mattered was on the line. What these wealthy patrons didn't know, what none of them could possibly understand from their position of privilege, was that the man they mocked had once moved through rooms like this with the same easy confidence they displayed. That before tragedy struck, he too had taken so much for granted. And no one in that opulent ballroom was prepared for what would unfold before the night was over. If stories of fathers who refuse to give up despite impossible odds move you, subscribe now. More powerful stories of resilience and redemption every week. 5 years earlier, David had everything society claimed to value. A thriving law practice specializing in family court. A beautiful home in the suburbs with Catherine, his college sweetheart and wife of 12 years. Their daughter Emma, just 4 years old then, with Catherine's golden curls and his stubborn determination. Weekends were filled with barbecues, friends stopping by, and planning for the future, including the adoption they'd begun pursuing, wanting to give a home to a child who needed one. Then came the rainy Tuesday when Catherine complained of a headache before leaving for her job as a high school counselor. By noon, she had collapsed in her office. By evening, the doctors were using words like massive hemorrhage and nothing more we can do. Within 72 hours, David had become a widower, Emma had lost her mother, and the world had tilted permanently off its axis. The law firm gave him compassionate leave, but weeks stretched into months as David struggled to help Emma process her grief while drowning in his own. His partners were sympathetic at first, then increasingly impatient. Eventually, they bought out his share for far less than it was worth, but David lacked the emotional resources to fight. The beautiful house went next. Too many memories, too large a mortgage on his diminishing income. They moved to a small apartment across town, where David took whatever work he could find, while maintaining a schedule that allowed him to be there for Emma. Window cleaning gave him flexible hours, and paid the bills, mostly. His law license remained active, but who would hire an attorney who'd been out of practice for years? Throughout it all, David had kept one promise to himself and to Catherine's memory. The adoption they'd begun would continue. It had become their connection to her, to the future they'd planned together. The little boy, Michael, was now 2 years old, living in foster care while David fought through bureaucratic red tape, home studies, and financial evaluations. Judge Harrison, who was hosting tonight's charity gala, would be making the final decision on Michael's case in less than 2 weeks. "Mr. Thompson?" A voice broke through David's thoughts as he stood awkwardly at the bar, nursing a single glass of the cheapest wine available. He turned to find a server extending a plate of hors d'oeuvres. "Would you like something to eat, sir?" The kindness in the young man's eyes nearly broke him. "Thank you," David managed, taking a small pastry. "No problem, sir. My mom raised me alone too." It's not easy. Before David could respond, a commotion near the main stage drew everyone's attention. Judge Harrison was tapping on the microphone, his imposing figure commanding immediate respect. At 65, Harrison had a reputation for being tough but fair in family court, his silver hair and penetrating gaze intimidating even seasoned attorneys. "Welcome, friends and benefactors," the judge began, his deep voice filling the room. "Tonight we celebrate and raise funds for the Children First Foundation, supporting foster children throughout our state." David edged closer to the stage, careful to remain inconspicuous. He needed Judge Harrison to see him as a responsible potential parent, not as the desperate man he felt like inside. "Many of you know that this cause is personal to me," Harrison continued. "Having grown up in the foster system myself, I understand the profound difference a stable, loving home makes in a child's life." This was news to David. In all his research about the judge who would determine Michael's fate, he'd found no mention of Harrison's childhood, which is why, the judge's voice hardened slightly, "I find it particularly troubling when I observe the way we sometimes judge who is worthy of providing that home." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Harrison's eyes seemed to scan the room deliberately. "Earlier this evening, I witnessed something disappointing. A man was mocked upon his arrival, not for any lack of character or commitment, but apparently for the crime of wearing an unfashionable suit." David felt his face grow hot as several heads turned subtly in his direction. "That man," Harrison continued, "is here because he received a personal invitation from me." The whispers intensified. David stood frozen, unsure whether to be grateful for the recognition or mortified by the additional attention. "In my courtroom, I see humanity at its best and worst. I see wealthy parents who view children as accessories and struggling parents who would give their last breath for their child's happiness. Status and finances matter in adoption cases, yes, but they are far from the only considerations." A woman in an expensive gown near David muttered to her companion, "Is he talking about that window cleaner? Surely he can't afford to properly care for a child." David clenched his jaw but remained silent. He'd heard worse in the 5 years since Catherine's death, from neighbors who thought single fathers couldn't possibly raise a daughter properly, from Emma's school when he couldn't afford the same extracurricular activities as before, from social workers concerned about his unstable employment history. Through it all, he'd focused on what mattered, Emma's happiness and securing Michael's future. As the evening progressed, David remained on the periphery, observing rather than participating. He watched wealthy donors write checks with casual flicks of their wrists that represented months of his income. He overheard conversations about vacation homes and private schools, concepts that now existed in another universe from his daily reality of discount groceries and secondhand clothes. An hour into the event, he decided he'd made enough of an appearance. He had shown respect for the judge's invitation, demonstrated his support for the cause. Emma was staying with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel, tonight, but he didn't like leaving her for too long. As he made his way toward the exit, a firm hand gripped his shoulder. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Thompson?" David turned to find Judge Harrison himself, his expression unreadable. "Your Honor, I appreciated the invitation very much, but I should get home to my daughter." Harrison nodded. "Emma, correct? 9 years old now?" "Yes, sir. And still maintaining her A average despite everything your family has been through?" David blinked in surprise. "She works very hard, as do you, from what I've observed." The judge gestured to a quiet corner. "Walk with me for a moment." As they moved away from the crowd, David felt dozens of eyes following them, the weight of judgment and curiosity almost tangible. What would you do if your child's future depended on this one conversation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. "Mr. Thompson, I'll be direct," Harrison said once they were relatively private. "Your adoption petition for Michael has faced considerable opposition from certain quarters. I understand my financial situation isn't ideal, Your Honor, but I can provide a stable, loving home. I've maintained a college fund for Emma despite everything, and Harrison held up a hand. "I'm not questioning your commitment. But there's a competing petition from the Caldwells. He nodded toward a polished couple across the room, the woman who had made the comment about David earlier. They're substantial donors to the foundation. Dual income, spacious home in the best school district. I see. David's voice was hollow. How could he compete with that? The familiar feeling of fighting an unwinnable battle washed over him. The thing is, Harrison continued, studying David carefully, Michael has some special needs that weren't initially apparent. He's showing signs of being on the autism spectrum. I know, David said quietly. I've been researching therapies and interventions. I've already spoken with Emma's school about their inclusive education program. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. You knew? The updated evaluation was just filed yesterday. I didn't need an official diagnosis to see he processes the world differently. During my visits, I noticed his sensitivity to certain sounds, the way he focuses intensely on patterns. He reminds me of my younger brother, who wasn't diagnosed until adulthood. David paused, suddenly worried he'd said too much. I just want to give him the support he needs to thrive, Your Honor. The judge was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. The Caldwells withdrew their petition this morning when they received the updated medical information. Apparently, a special needs child wasn't in their family plan. David struggled to process this information. They just gave up on him? Indeed. Harrison's tone was neutral, but his eyes held something that looked like approval. Now, this doesn't automatically mean your petition will be approved. There are still financial considerations, housing stability questions. I understand, Your Honor. But, Harrison continued, I would be interested to know if you've considered returning to legal practice. There's a considerable shortage of attorneys willing to take on cases in family court, particularly those involving special needs children. David stared at the judge, caught completely off guard. I haven't practiced in 5 years. The law hasn't changed that much, Harrison said dryly, and your experience, both professional and personal, would bring valuable perspective. He reached into his pocket and extended a business card. My clerk, Mary Ann. Call her on Monday to discuss court appointments. The pay isn't what you'd make in private practice, but it's steady government work with good benefits. David took the card automatically, his mind racing. Your Honor, I appreciate this, but this has no bearing on Michael's case, Harrison interrupted firmly. That will be decided on its own merits. But regardless of that outcome, Mr. Thompson, I believe in second chances. Sometimes life knocks us down in ways we never expected. What matters is getting back up. With that, the judge was called away by an event organizer, leaving David standing alone, the business card clutched in his hand like a lifeline. The following 2 weeks passed in a blur. David called the judge's clerk, had an interview, and was tentatively approved for a position as a court-appointed attorney for children in the system, contingent on a refresher course and supervision for his first few cases. The salary would nearly triple his current income, with health benefits that would cover both Emma and, if all went well, Michael too. Through it all, he tried not to get his hopes up about the adoption. Hope was dangerous. Catherine had taught him that during her final days, when they'd hoped against hope for a miracle that never came. On the morning of the hearing, Emma insisted on wearing her best dress, the one Catherine had bought her for a cousin's wedding, carefully preserved and now almost too small. David helped her with the buttons, his fingers trembling slightly. Dad, she said, her 9-year-old face serious beyond her years, even if the judge says no, we'll be okay. We'll figure something out for Michael. He hugged her fiercely, this child who had lost so much, yet still had room in her heart for more love. When did you get so wise, Em? Mom always said I had an old soul. She straightened his tie, another relic from his previous life. She would be proud of us today. The courtroom was mostly empty when they arrived. Just the social worker, the court-appointed guardian ad litem for Michael, and to David's surprise, Judge Harrison himself. Usually, adoption finalization hearings were handled by court commissioners, not the presiding judge of the family court division. Your Honor, David acknowledged, trying to keep his voice steady, this is my daughter, Emma. Emma stepped forward and extended her hand solemnly. "Thank you for considering our family for Michael, Your Honor." Harrison's stern face softened as he shook her hand. "You're very welcome, young lady. I understand you've been visiting Michael regularly at his foster home." "Yes, sir. I'm teaching him the names of dinosaurs. He really likes the long-necked ones, the sauropods." "Impressive knowledge," Harrison noted. "Dad takes me to the Natural History Museum on free admission days," Emma explained, "and we check out lots of books from the library." The judge nodded, then gestured for everyone to be seated as the clerk called the case. The proceedings began with the standard recitation of facts: Michael's background, his 28 months in foster care, the termination of his biological parents' rights, his developmental challenges, and David's petition for adoption. The social worker spoke next, outlining David's struggles, but also his consistent visitation record and the bond that had clearly formed between Michael and both David and Emma. She noted concerns about financial stability, but acknowledged the recent employment change that addressed many of those issues. The guardian ad litem followed, speaking directly to Michael's best interests. "Your Honor, while the Thompson home is modest, it offers something Michael desperately needs: unconditional acceptance. Mr. Thompson has already begun connecting with parent groups for children with autism. His daughter Emma demonstrates remarkable patience during their interactions with Michael. And perhaps most tellingly, Michael, who struggles with transitions and new people, lights up when the Thompsons arrive for visits." David sat rigidly, afraid to show emotion, afraid to hope. Emma's small hand slipped into his, squeezing tightly. Finally, Judge Harrison spoke. "Mr. Thompson, please stand." David rose on legs that felt numb, his heart pounding. "I've reviewed this case thoroughly," Harrison began, his voice formal. "The purpose of our adoption system is to find permanent, loving homes for children who need them. Not perfect homes, those don't exist, but homes where a child will be cherished, supported, and given every opportunity to become their best self." The judge paused, his expression unreadable. "5 years ago, Mr. Thompson, you had what many would consider an ideal life. You've since faced devastating personal loss, financial setbacks, and significant challenges. Throughout it all, you've put your daughter's needs first, maintained your integrity, and persevered." David felt Emma's grip tighten. "More importantly," Harrison continued, "when presented with information about Michael's special needs, your reaction wasn't concern about how it would affect you, but rather how you could best support him. That, Mr. Thompson, tells me everything I need to know about the kind of parent you are." The judge picked up his gavel. "It is the finding of this court that the adoption of Michael Ryan by David Thompson is approved and finalized, effective immediately. Congratulations, Mr. Thompson. Michael is legally your son." The sound of the gavel striking was drowned out by Emma's cry of joy. David stood frozen, unable to fully process the words he just heard, until his daughter's arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his chest. "We did it, Dad! Michael's coming home!" Only then did the reality sink in. They had done it. Despite everything, the loss, the poverty, the judgment, they had held on to this one piece of the future he and Catherine had dreamed of together. As they left the courtroom, the social worker approached with paperwork and a broad smile. "Michael's foster parents are bringing him to your apartment this afternoon. They've packed all his things." Emma was practically dancing with excitement. "Can we stop for ice cream to celebrate? Please, Dad." "Absolutely," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Today, we celebrate." Outside the courthouse, he paused on the steps, looking up at the clear blue sky. For the first time in 5 years, he felt Catherine's absence not as a crushing weight, but as a gentle presence, watching over them with approval. The following Sunday, David hosted a small welcome party for Michael at their apartment. Mrs. Patel from next door brought samosas. Emma's best friend and her parents came with a hand-me-down tricycle they'd repainted. The social worker stopped by briefly with a picture book about families that come together in different ways. And to David's complete surprise, Judge Harrison appeared at their door, holding a stuffed brachiosaurus. I understand from a reliable source that Michael appreciates sauropods, he said by way of explanation, nodding toward Emma. Your Honor, David began, overwhelmed. This is Arnold, please. We're not in court now. The judge handed the dinosaur to David. May I come in? The small apartment suddenly felt even smaller with Harrison's imposing presence, but the judge seemed completely at ease, kneeling down to Michael's level and speaking softly to him about the dinosaur. Later, as the other guests chatted and Michael explored his new toys with Emma's help, Harrison pulled David aside. I have a proposition for you, Thompson. In addition to the court appointments, I'm establishing a legal clinic for families dealing with special needs education issues. School districts often steamroll parents who don't know their rights. The position would be part-time initially, but could grow. David was speechless for a moment. Judge, Arnold, I don't know what to say. Why are you doing all this? Harrison was quiet for a moment, watching Michael and Emma. When I was 10, my foster father died suddenly. Heart attack. He and his wife had been planning to adopt me, the first stable home I'd known after 4 placements. After he died, she couldn't manage alone financially. I went back into the system, bounced through 7 more homes before aging out. He turned to David, his usually stern face vulnerable. She tried to keep me, but in those days, a widow with limited income didn't stand a chance against the system's biases. No one fought for us. David understood suddenly. So now you fight for others. When I can. When it's right. Harrison straightened, his professional demeanor returning. The clinic starts next month. Think about it. After the judge left, David sat on their small balcony, watching the sunset while Michael napped inside, exhausted from the excitement. The boy joined him, clutching the Brachiosaurus. Emma joined him, resting her head against his shoulder. Dad, are we going to be okay now? David pulled her close. We were always okay, Em. We had each other. But yes, I think things might be a little easier now. Mom would be happy about Michael. Yes, David agreed softly. She would be very happy. Inside, the phone rang, Harrison's clerk, calling about the legal clinic position. As David rose to answer it, he caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window, a father and daughter, soon to be joined by a little boy who needed them as much as they needed him. Never judge a family by what it has lost, but by how it loves through the loss. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more powerful stories. And click on the video on the screen to watch the next one with a twist so powerful you'll never forget it.